very warm welcome for today's Charity Recruit virtual boardroom. As some of you probably know, I'm Emily, one of the directors at Charity Recruit, and we're really delighted to have you with us for this session. AI is really transforming how charities work, from fundraising and service delivery to governance and risk. And we feel that 2026 is going to accelerate even further. We're really pleased today that we've got Zoe Amar, the founder and director of Zoe Amar Digital, a social enterprise and consultancy that helps charities lead digital and AI transformation in ways that are inclusive, strategic, and mission-led. Zoe co-chairs the the Charity AI Taskforce, working with funders and charities to shape a collective and ethical approach to AI adaptation. She also founded Charity Digital Skills Report, an annual barometer of how non-profits are approaching technology and digital maturity. And she's created the Charity Digital Code of Practice, which provides a practical framework for charities to strengthen capability and confidence. So I think you'll all agree she's an absolutely fantastic speaker for us today. And I know she represents the charity not-for-profit world really, really well. So hopefully in today's session, you'll get a really clear approach or a clear idea of how to approach things from an AI point of view going forward. So as I've said, the first part of the session will be Zoe's presentation, and then we'll move on to questions from delegates at the end. So Zoe, a huge welcome, and we'll look forward to your talk.
Hello, everyone. Lovely to see you. And thank you so much, Emily, for that very warm welcome. So it's great to be here today. Really looking forward to hearing all of your questions about AI and having some time for discussion. As Emily mentioned, what I'll be doing is taking you through a presentation. So I've got some slides, which I'll put up in a moment, and then we'll go into some discussion. I'd love to hear your thoughts, comments, questions, all of that sort of thing. And as Emily said, please do pop those in the chat as well as we go through, because that will give us a bit of a starter for 10 for what we'll be talking about today. So, as you have heard from that introduction, a big part of my job is working with leaders. And I think AI is one of the biggest challenges facing leaders at the moment. Now, we all know that the context in which voluntary sector leaders is working right now is exceptionally challenging from a financial perspective, from a service demand perspective. You will all be living that reality every day. AI has come along and is really disrupting what we are all thinking in terms of how do we deliver services? How do we get beneficiaries and donors to our websites, into our charities to help them get the interventions, the information, the advice, and the support they need? So it's a real challenge to how all of us have seen the sector operate over the last 10, 20, 30 years. I also believe that within that, there are definitely some opportunities for how we can all use AI in order to do things differently, be more efficient, but also to increase our impact. So I've got a couple of case studies about that and some guidance within this presentation that will help you do all of that. Okay, right. So I'm going to share my slides now and we can get into all of that. Hopefully you can all see that okay. So the three things I'm going to be talking about today is, firstly, I want to give you the kind of context of what the landscape is really looking like there. So we're going to talk about some trends from the Charity Digital Skills Report, which Emily mentioned that I founded. So I've got some data about how AI is being adopted across the sector and some of the things that are happening, but also not happening at the moment as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I've got some examples of use cases as well, so how charities are using AI, and it'd be interesting to hear how that resonates with what you and your teams might be doing. But equally, if there are things there that you're not doing, don't beat yourselves up. Today is really about looking at what we can do following this session as well. So very happy to hear your questions about that too. We're going to dive into how you manage risk and how you create the right governance around AI, which I know is something that a lot of leaders do worry about. But again, there are some real opportunities there so that you can make the most of these technologies. And we'll also be talking about skills, which is an issue that I hear time and again from leaders. I'm interested in this, but Have I got the right skills? How do I develop the right skills on my team? How do I know if those skills are going in the right direction for where our organisation is going to need to be in a couple of years' time? So we will touch on all of that as well as we go through. Okay, great. So those are the three things we'll be talking about today. Let's dive into some trends now. So all of this data comes from the Charity Digital Skills Report. It's a free resource out there in the sector, which we've been running since 2017. And essentially, it's an annual barometer of how digital and AI are being adopted across the sector, what the trends are, and also the funding and support needs that inevitably are coming along as well, alongside those changes. So, what we saw in the last report, which was in summer 2025, some of you may have seen, was that there was huge growth in the number of charities who are using AI. So, back in 2024, 61% of charities were using AI, and that's risen quite dramatically, in my view, to 76% of charities using AI. And in a couple of slides' time, I'll take you through how charities are using AI, and we'll see some examples when we get onto the case studies as well in a bit more depth. What we're also seeing is that organisations are beginning to change more broadly in response to that. So, as you'll see here, almost half of charities now have AI policies. I'm going to say a bit more about AI policy and governance and what I think needs to be included in that later on in the session. What we're also seeing as well, though, is that there's a real need for CEOs to develop their skills as boards need to do as well. So quite significant numbers of charities saying that there is a real skills gap amongst their boards, and also that their CEO needs support in that area. What I would say is that if you feel that you're in that category or your board's in that category, there are loads of places that you can go to for help, whether it's Reach volunteering to recruit digital or AI savvy trustee, or take advantage of some of the training that's out there, like this session today. There are ways you can get support to develop your skills even further. So please do make the most of what's out there in the sector. Just grouping these final 3 points together, which again were stats that definitely stuck out for me from the report, is that it feels like there's a little bit of a time lag between the growth in AI adoption across the sector and where our governance currently is. So I was really surprised that we've only got 23% of charities who've actually updated their risk registers, because we're already seeing that there's some real challenges to charities, whether it's in terms of less traffic to their website or what it might mean for how they deliver services. So that to me was perhaps a bit of a surprise. And I do think there's an opportunity to look at your governance so that trustees have better oversight of AI. I'll say a bit more about what that looks like and how a specific organisation has done that later. And perhaps most concerningly, in many ways, that only 1 in 5 are undertaking those regular assessments of risks. And given the rate of adoption that we're seeing here, there will be risks that are coming to the fore very regularly around bias and privacy and misinformation. AI is one of those technologies that I always describe as being high risk, high reward. So if you have good processes, you're fine, you'll be able to do this. But if you're not doing this stuff at all at the moment, that for me is something which needs to be looked at. So we can talk a bit more about that later as well. Okay, so let's dive into some of the specifics then. So what we did in the report was we also asked charities how they're using AI day to day. So we've actually got some numbers on this in the report itself. And we also see this every day in terms of how charities are using AI. So we've kind of got validation on the numbers from what we're seeing across the sector. So what I'm quite excited about is that obviously there's a real admin burden in terms of manual processes in particular in a lot of organisations, whether they're small, whether they're large. I bet we all work with people, and we're probably doing this ourselves day to day, picking up quite a lot of administrative work because maybe we don't have the tools in place, or we don't have the resources for the tools we'd really want, or just because the way we use technology has evolved piece by piece in a bit of organic way. So we're certainly seeing some charities saving some money in also some time for that kind of thing. Certainly, there's quite a lot of content creation that I'm seeing happening across the sector now. So whether it's people writing reports or writing content for marketing campaigns, I'm sure there'll be lots of people on this call who've done that kind of thing, maybe helping getting AI to help them draft an email or pull a report together or something like that. And then, of course, there's the whole sort of idea generation side of things as well. And actually, I'm hearing increasing numbers of leaders wanting to get their skills developed in that area as well. So how do I do this thing? But also, I'm facing quite a significant challenge. Let's talk it through with an AI tool and let's plan for how we can solve this problem together, which is something I was actually doing with an AI tool earlier this morning. So, lots of different ways that you can use AI here, whether it's admin, whether it's research, whether it's creating content, coming up with ideas, having that extra support as well, right through to the really strategic side of things. So, we all know that there's lots of charities using AI for better or worse, writing funding bids. I'm very happy to talk about the merits of doing that later on. It can be a real double-edged sword, but also tapping into those additional capabilities as well. So I've just been working with a youth charity recently where they have been using AI to do some things that frankly they wouldn't have had the time or perhaps the capabilities to do, but it's really helped them do some fantastic research and data analysis, which is really exciting and will help them increase their impact. So a lot of different things you can do here, right through from the administrative side of things through to the strategic. Okay, so I want to briefly touch on a case study of a charity that's doing a lot of these things really, really well. So Speakers Trust are a small charity. I think they've got maybe 10 staff, maybe a little less than that. And they're an amazing charity that goes into schools and they support young people with developing their presentation skills. They were a little bit bogged down by admin. They themselves would say that classic small charity challenge. I remember facing that myself when I worked for a small charity. And what they wanted to do was to understand the impact of the amazing work they were doing, going into schools, going into classrooms, going into assembly halls every single day, and use that to make better decisions. So what they did was they combined AI and also automation tools as well. And I think they used Zapier as part of that. And they essentially pulled on all the data that they're getting from going into schools day to day. And I would imagine that would be things like the number of pupils they're interacting with, evaluations of sessions, any qual feedback, any other metrics they've got from doing those sessions. And then what they've done is they are effectively automating these reports, which get emailed to their staff every day. And that is really exciting because that's where you can use the decisions, the data that comes from this to make better decisions in real time, which I think is such a fantastic capability for a small charity to have access to. Who wouldn't want that? And the second thing they did, which is
Well,
really
Franklin.
and ambitious, is they wanted to support more young people, but like many charities, they didn't have access to thousands and thousands of volunteers. But what they wanted to do was to help more young people get support as and when they needed it. So what they did was they developed an interactive AI coach, which means that if you're a young person and you're giving, say, a presentation in your geography class the next day, you can go and talk to that coach, you can get feedback on your presentation, the content, the delivery, your communication style, and then you can then use that to improve your presentation in real time without necessarily having to interact with a volunteer. This is not meant to replace the amazing work they do in the classroom, in schools. It's really about scaling that up, making sure that young people can get support as and when they need it, but they still get that fantastic face-to-face guidance from their wonderful volunteers when they go into schools as well. So it's very complementary. It's really about augmenting what their fantastic volunteers and staff are doing, not replacing it. Okay, right. Let's dive into some risks now. So we saw a good news story about use of AI there. I wouldn't be doing my job properly if we didn't have a look at risk as well. So these are some risks that I hear from leaders, and I'm just going to pull out a few of them in terms of themes. Um, So I think one of the big things we've seen across the sector over the last few years, or in fact over the last year in particular, is this growing concern about disintermediation. Now, just to touch on what disintermediation is, if you haven't come across the term before, it's effectively where people would go to AI tools rather than coming to a charity for help. So if I think about a charity that I'm working with at the moment, it's a small health charity. They represent a specific health condition. One of the things that they're a little bit worried about is their beneficiaries effectively getting advice about treatment options directly from those AI search summaries you now get when you go to Google, unless you turn that off. Rather than coming to their website and getting really accurate, really relevant information. They also know from some user research that we did with their beneficiaries who are living with that health condition that people are sometimes going directly into ChatGPT or Copilot or Claude or Gemini and other LLMs and getting advice about how to treat their condition directly from those tools. And again, a massive risk there if that information isn't accurate, if it's not relevant for them, and potentially could cause harm as well. So I do think this is something which is a little bit of an existential threat to how we get information, advice, and support to people across the sector. Given what we know about I think there's also some challenges around how the people we need to get to, whether it's donors, beneficiaries, their expectations could change. The seductive thing about AI is obviously the speed and the polish of the outputs that you get from it. Now, we all know that beneath the surface, once you start reviewing those outputs, sometimes the quality isn't everything, or even the accuracy isn't everything that it looks like it should be. And nevertheless, are we going to see some of these groups kind of prioritizing the fact that they're getting something really quick that looks great rather than I need to do some research and go to this charity website and have a good look around it and get really good, accurate information? So I think there's something there about how it's already changing behavior as we saw in that first point. And then in terms of just pulling some of these together, I do think there's something that we all need to do as leaders, and I speak for myself as much as anyone else. And how is this ultimately going to impact our missions? So, for example, if you're a youth charity focused on mental health, what does the rise of AI mean for how young people are going to get advice about mental health? What does that mean for how you then might need to change your approach in reaching that community, or how you might need to deliver services differently in the future? No easy answers on that, but the more you can start to think about what those different scenarios could be, how they could play out, the better. And then just bringing some of these other things together, I definitely think there's a really strong need for reviewing your policies as well. So whether you've got an AI policy or not, and I will talk about that later, have you given staff the guardrails they need so that they can use these tools safely and securely? Are your trustees equipped with the right skills so they can provide the right oversight and they can give you the correct strategy, scrutiny, and support as you work through your AI approach as an organisation? And above all, a bit of an emerging risk I've seen over the last year. How can we collectively avoid making some probably really tempting decisions about cost cutting? I do think we're getting to a bit of a tipping point where it might be very easy to point at someone's role and say, well, actually, could AI do that? My view is that in the sector, we actually have so much expertise, so much organisational knowledge, so much skill and experience in dealing with the communities that we work with that it's actually going to be really hard to automate roles. But on paper, it may look really tempting. So we're going to have to find our way through that together as a sector and make sure that above all, we still have wonderful people, very talented people working in the sector, and we grow that talent and we make the most of it rather than making decisions just on cost. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about governance as well. So this is a case study from the National Lottery. Some of you are probably thinking, well, how do I manage these risks and what can I do? Now, National Lottery, obviously a big organisation, as we all know, but there's something about the approach which I think can be translated into lots of organisations, regardless of size. Now, some of you might know that the National Lottery have started to adopt using AI more in terms of the work that they're doing internally, but also looking at how they can provide the right guidance to people who are applying for grants. And they put that guidance out there a while ago. They knew that all this change going on in different levels meant that their oversight of all of these different programs needed to be really good. So what they came up with was three different layers to provide the right oversight. So, firstly, they've got a strategy group. So they own the strategy and the organisational position on AI. Then beneath that, rather like the layers of the cake, so I guess this layer would be the icing, you have the working group where they have oversight of all of their proof of concept projects. So those pilots where they're testing out new and exciting ways of using AI. And then finally, they have a peer group as well, where people are learning together about AI. Now, I think this is a really, really brilliant structure. I think you can translate it into the context of most charities, unless you are a really small organisation. But I do think that having this oversight at these different levels, the strategy, the sort of learning, the execution, is really important because then you've got oversight of risk in all these different parts of the organisation. And it also meets a need that I'm seeing in other organisations across the board, really, which is that a lot of AI governance is at its most valuable on the ground. There are staff, there'll be volunteers who are making decisions about using AI, what to use it for, what information to put into these tools every day, despite the best efforts of your HR team, your IT team, what your AI policy might or might not say. And having this oversight at all of these different layers in the organisation will give them the guidance and support they need. And it's a way of getting all of this activity and learning out there, visible and centralised. Okay, right. So just briefly on AI policies, because we touched on that earlier. Um, we saw on that first slide that 48% of charities have AI policies. You might think great progress because it was 16% the year before. I get sent a lot of charity AI policies for review. And because it's the first time organisations are doing them, I have come to witness quite a lot of things which I think need to be changed. So I've actually written a blog about this. Please do go and have a look at it after the session. But in summary, I think you need to be really clear about the scope of the policy, have very clear guidance in the policy itself about data privacy, what staff can and can't use AI for, and to link all of it back up to your approach to inclusion. And that is really important for all the challenges we see in AI implementation around bias and discrimination, and how it can hardwire it into staff to review outputs for that as well. So making sure that you're really integrating AI into what you do overall as an organisation safely and responsibly. I think so much of that comes down to having a really good rock solid policy and having the right governance around that as well, as you saw on the previous slide. So that is something I would highly recommend also. Okay, and then just a couple more things I want to say before we move on to hearing your questions. Really excited about that. The other thing that I get asked about a lot by leaders is, okay, well, it's all well and good. I want to move forward with AI, but do we have the right skills and what can I do about it? Now, in many ways, a lot of the things that I've got on this slide are about AI, but they're really also about some lessons learned that we've all witnessed from how digital has come into all of our organisations and transformed them to some extent over the last 10, 15 years. Succession planning is really, really, really important. What you don't want to do, regardless of size, is become dependent on one or two people who are utterly amazing at this stuff. And then, for whatever reason, they may end up leaving because they're ambitious and they want to progress. So you will inevitably have a few pioneers who are excited and are moving ahead. What you want to do is to start distributing that expertise as early on as you can, democratizing it, if you will. So making sure that you've got a range of champions distributed across the organization. They're not just in one team, they're not just at one level, but you're really getting that conversation started as a leader about, well, how can we use AI and what we do, whether it's day to day, whether it's strategic, whether it's a particular project. And that's actually a great question to be asking as a leader as you start any initiative. And it may be that in some instances the answer is AI is not appropriate here, but just the fact that you're setting the tone in that way is a really powerful thing, and it will encourage staff to explore. And they can do that safely as long as they have the right guardrails. Another area of learning, which I've seen work really well in digital, really work in AI, is remember it doesn't have to be about commissioning a load of costly training. Training obviously can be really helpful, but there's also so much learning about digital and AI that I've seen in charities. It's really powerful that goes on day to day, that learning on the job. So, where can you buddy your pioneers up with people who are less confident? Where can you maybe do some low cost but really immersive things where you might get someone to shadow someone who's more experienced in this for an afternoon, or a couple of days or something? What can you do to encourage teams to work together? So, for example, marketing and fundraising come together on a big campaign. How can you set them a bit of a challenge around how they might use AI to make the campaign even more successful, reach more people, do something that's innovative, for example, reaching a new market segment that you haven't got to before? So, I think using this as an opportunity to do things differently, and to tap into some of those capabilities that you might not previously have had access to is as important as thinking about how we cascade and diffuse these skills across our organisations. Okay, I'm just going to briefly say a couple of things about resources and then we'll move on to your questions. So, Emily mentioned the Charity Digital Code of Practice. It's a free framework for charities of all sizes. We have just updated it in June to include a major focus on AI best practice. In fact, we've got a code steering group meeting this afternoon, so it's all very top of mind for me. This is a free resource. There's lots of guidance in there that's come directly from charities themselves. It was developed with the Charity Commission on the steering group and some of the sector infrastructure bodies. So it's really tried and tested stuff that we've got in there, and guidance that we know has worked for charities who were involved in the development process every day. So please do go and check that out. And then finally, I've got lots of resources for you about AI. We've done some partnership work with Microsoft, so we've got some free video resources for leaders of small and large charities about AI strategy and governance. There's loads of free AI resources on our site, loads of templates and checklists and that sort of thing. And we've also got a podcast which is about leaders doing things differently today to prepare for the world of tomorrow. So hopefully that's all a bit of a starter for 10 that will get you thinking about what you can do next and how you can take your next steps with AI. Okay, great. So I think we've got some time for questions now. So I'm going to stop screen sharing. I think we've also got some comments in the chat. But has anyone got a question they would like to kick off with?
Shall I read out Lindsay's question from the chat to everyone, and then perhaps you can answer, Zoe, unless Lindsay, you want to join yourself and say?
Yeah, very happy to.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Zoe. That's really interesting. My question to you really was, so we presented our AI policy to our board last year, and one of our board members, who does come from a not from the public sector. His background's not public sector; it's private sector. He said that his company, well, he questioned the need to disclose that you are using AI. And his argument was that we use Google all the time, to search for things, to get ideas, but we don't disclose that we've done that in the reports that we write and that sort of stuff. So why do we feel the need to do that if we're using AI just as a tool, not to replace any of the research that we're doing, but just as a tool to support in the same way that we use Google? And I just wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that, really.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I have to say, I don't think there's a right answer on this, but I can tell you my thoughts on it. So the first thing is, I think personally, I think you only need to be disclosed in a proportionate way. So, for example, if you were emailing a high net worth individual, like a prospective donor, and you used AI to help you craft the email, I don't think you necessarily need to say that. If you've written some massive flagship report and you've used AI in writing that report, you could disclose that. I think it all depends what kind of organization you are as well, and where disclosing it is going to help serve a need amongst your community. So I think there's something about, is it proportionate, and what's the purpose of disclosing it as well, and what's the right thing to do as well in line with your values. So for example, if we think about some of the uses of AI in the NGO sector, transparency is so important in that sector that I can see why there are some NGOs who do feel that they need to be especially transparent there. So I think maybe having some criteria that would help guide your decision on when we're going to disclose or not. Obviously, if donors or beneficiaries' data's being used, with, say, if you brought in Dataro or some other predictive analytics tool, I mean, that gets you into a whole world of data protection and GDPR, and the ICO has got some great guidance on this. But where it's just we used a tool to create some content or do some research, I think you'd need to look at it on a bit of a case by case basis and maybe work through some scenarios internally. So I think the answer is you and your trustee are both right, but you'll probably need to work it through and maybe go back to them with some scenarios of how you're going to tackle that together. That would be my advice.
Great, thank you so much.
I think
Welcome.
I think that brings us on slightly to the question from Let Me Know. Do you want me to say that, or are you happy to?
I'm happy to do it. I'm D, by the way. Sorry, I just realised
Hi.
it's LMK and not D. This has just been playing on my mind for a while because we're trying to make the most of AI. We're a small charity, and it's incredibly helpful. But all of our IT is based on Google, on our Google account. So Gemini automatically, when you open your email or when you do any work or when you open a PDF, it automatically summarizes, gives you suggestions for answers, etc., which is all very helpful. But I worry about where that information goes, and I can't seem to get an answer. And I just wondered if you knew, Zoe, whether that is restricted to our account because there's really sensitive information in some of those areas.
Yeah, of course. So just to ask a quick question about that before I answer this question, have you got the paid for version of Gemini? Were you using Google Workspace, the kind of business version
We're
of that?
using the charity kind of version of the business one, yes.
So I think if you're using the charity version, I think that level of Gemini might be open. So in my organization, we use Google Workspace, but it's the paid version, and that means we've got the locked down or as much as it can be version of Gemini. With the charity level, is that the one where you get a certain amount of free spaces, free user licenses? Is that right?
Oh, not entirely sure. I know we get quite a big discount on the annual rate, but I can't remember whether you get extra spaces.
So I think that's the missing piece of the puzzle, because I was talking to someone
Okay.
recently, also from a small charity, who was really keen to scale because he was getting loads of really good value from Gemini, the paid version. I believe that he wanted to get more of his team using it, but I'm not sure you get a discount on the paid version of Gemini as part of the charity package. I don't know. You would need to talk to
Okay.
Google directly, because if it's the paid version, you have more protections
Okay.
in terms of the data. What I would also say, though, is it really depends on the sensitivity of the data. So I'll give you an example without naming the organisation. I went in recently and worked with a fantastic small NGO. They were really good. They were all using paid Gemini, but they had done some very good thinking internally about which data they'd be willing to put into Gemini
Hmm.
and not. So there was some very sensitive data related to people that they were having to get out of a certain country, which I won't name, when they were just not safe. And the CEO said, there is no way I'd ever put that data into AI. And he was very AI savvy, but he said that data is staying within Signal, and with a certain email package they would use for certain very, very specific, very sensitive communications. And I understand why he would not be wanting to, because it's literally people's lives at risk there. And the more places you put data in any circumstances, however safe it is, there's more places it can leak from. So I think there's a bit of work to be done in terms of have a look at what package you've got, have a look at what data, what information you've got as well, because there'll be different levels of sensitive information. And part of it is deciding what you're happy with going in these tools and what isn't. And also, there is some work you can do in the back end of Gemini as well to limit the amount of time data is kept as well, but it's still kept for a certain amount of time. So that's also very much worth looking at as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, can I jump in with a question, Emily?
Of course.
I guess we're talking about using an organizational level. We use Copilot because it's with 365 charity package, and it's in terms of retaining the data and the issue. But one of the things that when we've been looking at our policy, one of the things is that AI is moving really quickly. And what it could do last year, what it could do last month to this month is, so it's a very much a movable feast. But one of the things that came up is people with neurodiversity using it. And that's where we came up against, to answer your question, Lindsay, about people with neurodiversity wanting to declare every time that they're using AI, it prejudices their work because there's still a lot of skepticism about AI generated work. So actually it puts those people and discriminates against those people. I mean, for many years, people have been using in my organisation with neurodiversity a thing called Dragon. And so again, that's AI generated, AI supported work. It's slightly different. So it's incorporating that into your AI policy, that you may have people who are neurodiverse who are using AI to support them to do their jobs, and actually declaring that every time they do that, it might not sit well. So you need to be clear about that in your policy. So just want to add that in terms of that conversation.
That's a really important point. Thank you for sharing that, Andrew. We do quite a lot of work around inclusive adoption of AI, but I hadn't actually appreciated that particular angle around disclosure from a specific group, and that's really important. So thank you. That's really given me food for thought.
Thanks, Andrew. Ellie, I think you had a point in the chat. Are you happy to speak?
Yeah, I'm happy. Apologies again about my camera. It seems to have just forgotten all its drivers, so that's really helpful. Yeah, thank you for that. That's really helpful and lots to think about there. I was interested in your case study at the start with the Speakers Trust, and we're a very small charity as well, and it's how do you work out like really basically how do you work out what you can use it for? Because I'd love to consolidate data, and then how do you work out how you do that?
Yeah, those are two great questions. Thank you. So I think you may know more about this than you think, because you've asked those two questions in exactly the right order. Because the first thing I would do, and I do know some specifics from Speakers Trust, but happy to connect you with them as well. I think always start with the business problem. So I'd have thought that in Speakers Trust case, it's very much a situation where they thought, well, actually, we really want to know about the difference we're making day to day. We don't want to wait till we're reporting to funded every quarter or whenever. So how can we use AI to pull together this? Because they're getting data and metrics and insight every day when they're going into schools, I would imagine. So I think start with what are our ideal outcomes here. And then what I would do, and personally, I think there's just not enough of this going on in AI anywhere at the moment, is what is our current process? So often people look at adopting AI in isolation. So let's just bring it in, use a tool, do a thing. But unless you've understood what the underlying process is, you aren't going to change things overall. So they've probably looked at, I would imagine, their process for how do we report on impact at the moment? Okay, this isn't working. How do we break this? Build this back up again and make sure we're using these tools so we can get this information more quickly and make better decisions. So for me, it's always a question of what's the workflow, what's the process, where are we going to use AI, where are we not going to use AI to make this better. So this is where the work that you talked about on the outcomes, the business problem we need to solve is really, really important. And not enough people are doing that at the moment. And this is where leaders can make a big difference, right?
Thanks, Zoe. Valerie, are you happy to share your question?
Yes, Zoe, I was interested in knowing your thoughts regarding the use of AI in funding proposals. So we hear from some of our donors that they've been inundated with proposals that look more or less the same because everyone is using AI. And their behavior in some cases is changing as a result. Maybe not instantly, but some of them are saying they're pausing their program while they're looking at, the proposals. They want to give other people a chance that have never had, never put a proposal before, etc. So we're kind of trying to, we see this as potentially a major risk, longer term. And we just wonder whether you can, what are your thoughts on this? We've got our ideas as to how we can mitigate this, but I just wonder whether there's anything that you'd like to add on this.
Yeah, thank you. And I think this is a real challenge in a different context in recruitment as well at the moment, isn't it? So this is a big meaty one, isn't it? And I think this is actually a systemic thing rather than an AI thing, because I think demand was always going to go up anyway at a time like this. It's just that AI has made it even more obvious. What I would say is that if you want to use AI as part of writing funding proposals, it's not a blunt instrument. I'm totally supportive of charities using it. It's really about testing how you can use it in the right way. So, for example, I've got a contact who's a CEO of a charity where he says we never use AI to generate the proposal, but what we have done is we've used AI to create some templates for different types of funding proposals we might need to give, which means that when we come to see a funding opportunity, we've got a kind of structure there ready to go, and that makes the writing of the proposal a lot easier. So it kind of comes back a little bit to what we talked about in the previous question answer about the process. So rather than outsourcing the writing of the funding proposal to a tool, what's your process look like overall? Because I would have thought that the AI generated proposals where maybe they sound quite generic, the quality assurance, the review side of things is just not strong enough. So making sure you're really building in some time to do that. Maybe you get a couple of pairs of eyes on it rather than one person who's massively overstretched and trying to get 20 funding proposals out the door that week. So I think go back to basics. Look at what your proposal is and then work out how you can build in AI to make the biggest difference when you're writing those proposals.
Thanks, Zoe. Well, those have been some really insightful questions. Is there anybody else with a question that they'd like to run past Zoe before we close the session?
I have. How do you get your board to trust AI?
This is a great question. You saved the best till last, Andrew. So the one thing I would recommend here, I mean, there's a lot that I could say about this, but the number one thing for me is to get people understanding how they are interacting with AI already. So when I go in and talk to boards, I always say to them, well, did you use your face to open your phone this morning? Did you use facial recognition again when you authorized a banking transfer on your mobile app? Do you use Grammarly when you're spell checking? We're all interacting with AI all day, every day. We might not realize that we are. So helping them realize that they are actually using a bit of AI day to day. Maybe they've used it outside of work to plan a holiday or something. So really helping them understand where they're using it already. I always think a bit of peer pressure as well in a positive way. So you're a mental health charity. Well, how are other mental health charities using AI? So I think showing them some examples of how they're using it, how similar organisations are using it will help build trust. I also think having a kind of safe environment in the board to talk about those ethical issues they're not sure about, that will actually ultimately lead to better decision making. So finding a way you can bring that out and hold that space for them to have those conversations and do something with that that's going to help them make better decisions rather than be quite hands off about AI. That's the place that I'd want to get them to.
Excellent. Thanks, Zoe. Well, I think that's everybody's questions, unless anyone's got a sneaky last minute one to add in. Zoe, just quickly, if people want to access your knowledge or have continue the conversation offline, how open are you to that?
Oh, very open. Please do drop me a line. I'm going to share the slides with Emily. So Emily, please do share them with everyone. I'll also pop my email in the chat as well if anyone's got follow-up questions. And I'm also on LinkedIn as well. So if anyone wants to drop me a line there, please feel free. It would be lovely to hear from you. And thank you for having me today. It's been super fun and I've loved the questions.
Thank you so much, Zoe. You've made it really useful, and hopefully you've all taken something away from that. Obviously, I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't just say, if you are looking for any digital leaders or any recruitment needs within your organisation, do bear us in mind for that. And thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you at one of our seminars going forward. Thanks for your time, everyone.